A deaf girl goes missing in a crowded U.S. airport. For 6 hours, no one can find her until a K9 dog named Juno starts acting strangely. What they discover next is something no security camera could have predicted, a child hiding not from danger but from fear itself. This is a true-to-life story of instinct silence and a bond beyond words. If stories like this move you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps bring these moments to light. The airport was alive in the way only international terminals could be, a symphony of rolling suitcases, last-minute announcements, and the murmur of too many voices speaking too many languages at once. It was a blur of motion and lights and noise, but for Lila Jameson, 10 years old and born without the ability to hear, it was always a kind of moving silence. Her world had never included the chaos of chatter or the blare of boarding calls. What others took for granted sound was to her a foggy concept at best, a theory she had learned about in therapy sessions and children's books. She clung to her mother's hand as they made their way through the crowd at Denver International Airport, her other hand gripping the worn leather cover of a small notebook. Inside it were pages upon pages of her thoughts, scribbled in neat pencil strokes, her voice to herself, her way of anchoring her presence in a world that often forgot to notice her. She called the notebook Second Ear. It was a name she'd come up with by herself when she was 7, and it had stuck. Lila wore a bone conduction hearing aid. It vibrated behind her right ear, translating sounds into subtle tremors, but even then connections dropped often, especially in noisy, echo-filled places like this. She didn't mind too much. She had long since stopped expecting technology to bridge what nature had not given her. Her mother, Rachel, was focused, determined, but always tired. She navigated with the brisk energy of someone who had learned to stay alert every second, especially in public. Traveling alone with a deaf child wasn't for the faint of heart. Rachel had mastered the art of scanning signs, reading lips, and interpreting her daughter's expressions like a language of their own. Today, they were headed to San Francisco, where Lila would begin a 2-week program at a school for children with sensory disabilities. It was meant to be a trial, maybe even a new chapter if things worked out. Lila didn't know yet how she felt about that. She had folded a slip of paper in her back pocket. On it she had written in careful block letters, "Not everything broken wants fixing." They stopped near Gate B-16. The flight was delayed by 30 minutes. Rachel sighed and motioned for Lila to sit. Lila nodded and pulled out her notebook, opening to a blank page. She loved these in-between moments when no one expected anything from her and she could just be. She began to write. June 18th. Airport. Big glass ceiling. Everyone is loud but looks tired. A baby is crying. I think it's crying because it doesn't understand waiting. I like waiting. Waiting feels like dreaming while awake. She paused, chewing lightly on the back of her pencil, then drew a tiny sketch of a dog beside the date. Not just any dog, a German Shepherd. It was always a German Shepherd. In her dreams, that dog had no name, just golden eyes and a soft growl that meant safety. She was sketching its ears when her hearing aid buzzed and blinked red. Disconnected again. She frowned, fiddled with it, but nothing changed. Rachel was texting someone, distracted. Lila didn't tug her sleeve this time. She just turned the hearing aid off. There was no point. Instead, she watched the people. A man reading a newspaper upside down. A woman talking into her phone, laughing but not smiling. A child kicking the base of a chair rhythmically as if it was a song only they knew. Lila imagined what all of their voices might sound like. The PA system buzzed faintly, a crackling she could sometimes feel if she sat just right, but the words were lost to her. No one moved, so it probably didn't matter. She went back to writing. I think the dog is real, she wrote. Not real like fur and teeth. Real like how dreams sometimes feel more true than mornings. I think one day I will meet the dog. I think he knows me already. Rachel touched her shoulder gently, signing Restroom. Lila nodded. She knew the layout by now. Just around the corner from the Starbucks kiosk near the Lost and Found sign that always made her chuckle. She'd never been lost, not really, but the sign made her think maybe even lost things had their own place to return to. Rachel gestured, "Be back in 5." Lila signed back, "Okay, I'll take second ear," and she did, clutched it to her chest like armor as she weaved through the crowd, finding the restroom door and stepping inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed too, but she couldn't hear them. Still, she always imagined them humming like insects alive, in a way humans could never quite tame. Inside, it was quieter, or maybe just emptier. She chose the stall at the end, the one with the broken lock she'd noticed on their last trip. It felt more private, even if less secure. She closed the door, gently sat down, not to use the toilet, but to breathe. And to write. Sometimes the world is so full of sound I can't hear my own silence. Here, I can hear everything inside me. That's why I like bathrooms. It's not gross, not really. It's like a cave, a place where echoes know your name. She stayed there, scribbling. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Outside, Rachel checked her watch again and stood craning her neck towards the hallway. But Lila didn't come out. 10 minutes turned into 15. Rachel shifted her weight from one foot to the other outside the restroom, her eyes scanning the passing crowd with increasing anxiety. She held Lila's backpack close, the pink straps looped tightly around her fingers, her thumb rubbing along the frayed edge of the zipper, a nervous tic she hadn't realized had returned. The area around Gate B16 wasn't particularly large, but it was busy. Families, solo travelers, uniformed airline crew, all in a hurry, all oblivious to the mother silently counting seconds by the door. She had let Lila go into the bathroom alone countless times before. They had rules, they had signals. Lila was responsible, more cautious than most kids her age, but today felt off. Rachel stepped forward and pushed open the restroom door. The heavy scent of sanitizer and recycled air rushed out to meet her. She hesitated at the threshold. Lila was 10 and independent. But worry now trumped decorum. "Lila," she called loud and clear, pausing after each syllable just in case her daughter could sense vibration if not meaning. No answer. Rachel walked in slowly, her eyes darting to the mirrors and empty sinks, then to the line of closed stall doors. She rapped her knuckles against the first. "Occupied?" she asked. Nothing. She tried the second. Still nothing. She moved down the line, knocking gently, then with more urgency. "Lila! It's Mom! Are you okay?" Silence. Only the faint whoosh of air vents responded. She bent down, looking at the gap beneath the last stall, the one she knew Lila preferred for its privacy. No feet, no shadow. She tried the door. It was ajar, just enough to push open. Empty. The metal lock was half broken, just as before. The only thing left inside was a faint smudge on the wall. Maybe pencil. Maybe nothing. Rachel's stomach clenched. She turned back toward the sink area, scanned again, and called once more, her voice shaking. Now louder. "Lila!" Nothing. No sound, no movement. She rushed back out into the corridor, eyes wild scanning every face, every figure. "Excuse me," she said to a passing gate agent. "My daughter went into the restroom 10-15 minutes ago. I can't find her. She's deaf. I think she's missing." The words came out half-choked. The agent, a young man in a navy blazer, blinked, then stood straighter. "Let me call someone," he said quickly, already reaching for his radio. Within minutes, a supervisor appeared, followed by airport security. A public address call was made, not that it would help Lila. Descriptions were taken. Rachel showed them pictures on her phone. 10 years old, brown hair, red hoodie, hearing aid. A small notebook always carried. Her name is Lila, Lila, deaf but alert. Gentle, observant, doesn't wander, doesn't run. Please find her. Rachel's voice cracked as she recited the list. The lead officer nodded with a professional calm and started issuing orders. Another officer led Rachel to a seating area, but she wouldn't sit. "You don't understand," she said. "She doesn't know how to ask for help. She doesn't hear alarms or shouts," or her words trailed off as she pointed toward the ceiling. "There are cameras." "Don't you have cameras?" "We do," the officer confirmed. "We'll check the footage right away." A technician was already working with a tablet, tapping in timestamps and angles. But something was wrong. The feed from the restroom hallway was corrupted. The video cut out just after 1:11 p.m., right when Lila had entered. A blur of pixels replaced the stream. The technician muttered to himself, replayed and zoomed in, but the image remained distorted. Rachel stood behind him, fists clenched. "That's her," she said, pointing to the shadow entering frame. "That's my daughter." And then she trailed off. The next frame showed a gap, then static, then the hallway now empty. No exit, no body, no clue. Could she have slipped out another way, the officer asked. Maybe another door. Rachel shook her head vehemently. There's only one way in or out. I checked the whole restroom. There's nowhere else she could have gone. The technician frowned. We've had occasional disruptions in the feed. Electrical interference. Maintenance was scheduled here last week. Are you telling me you lost her? Rachel snapped, voice trembling. You lost a deaf 10-year-old girl in your airport. Ma'am, the officer said firmly. We are initiating a full Level 2 search protocol. All gates will be notified, all personnel briefed. We'll find her. But Rachel was already pacing. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. She knew her daughter, knew her routines, her fears, her strengths. Lila wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide unless she felt threatened or misunderstood. She opened her phone and quickly typed out a message. If you see this, Lila, find someone in uniform. Show them your notebook. Show them this picture. I'm here, I'm looking. She posted it online, tagged the airport, the police, local news. Within 10 minutes, it was shared hundreds of times. Somewhere in the crowd, somewhere in the terminal, her daughter had vanished. Vanished in a space where every corner was watched, every hallway monitored, every door secured. And yet, somehow, the system had blinked just long enough for a child to slip between the cracks. Back at Gate B, 16 passengers boarded, flights departed. The world moved forward. But Rachel stood still, watching, waiting, holding a backpack that felt suddenly far too light, not knowing that just behind a maintenance panel down the concourse not far from where she stood, the scratched corner of a red hoodie caught a glimmer of fluorescent light, motionless, unseen. 3 hours passed, each one longer than the last, each minute, stretching into a lifetime of questions that had no answers. The airport's full security protocol had been activated, Level 2, search missing child procedures floor by floor. Sweeps, all exits monitored, all restrooms rechecked. Officers combed through lounges, stairwells, storage areas, even the luggage chutes behind the walls, places no child should logically reach. But when a 10-year-old goes missing in a place designed for control and visibility, logic becomes an enemy. Rachel refused to leave the area around Gate B16. She sat rigid on a plastic chair, hands trembling, eyes scanning every uniform that walked past, every child walking hand in hand with a parent heart stalling at every red hoodie in sight. No sign of Lila, no notebook, no hearing aid, no clue. Every officer who returned from search duty had the same tight expression, the same apologetic shake of the head, and every time Rachel would rise to her feet instinctively only to sink back down when she saw their empty hands. They had set up a temporary command center near the TSA checkpoint. Large screens flickered with camera feeds from every angle of the terminal. Officers monitored entrances, baggage claims, loading docks, jet bridges. She couldn't have gotten far, one officer murmured, but it sounded more like wishful thinking than certainty. A supervisor stood at the center barking orders into a walkie-talkie, his voice clipped and calm. Sweep maintenance corridors again. Check the parking shuttles. Verify badge access logs for the last 2 hours. If anyone entered a restricted area without clearance, I want to know who and why. But nothing came back. It was as if the child had simply dissolved into thin air. One officer raised the possibility that Lila might have wandered outside the terminal. Perhaps she had followed someone through a side door, mistaken it for a restroom exit. Rachel snapped at the suggestion. She doesn't wander, she said through clenched teeth. She doesn't follow strangers. She would have come back. The suggestion lingered anyway, like a bitter aftertaste. With every passing hour, the tone shifted. The urgency remained, but underneath it grew something heavier doubt. Doubt that she was still inside. Doubt that she was alone. Then, just before the 4th hour, a man approached security. Mid-30s red jacket, travel backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked nervous, his eyes shifting as he spoke to the agent. I think I might have seen something, he said. A girl, small brown hair, red hoodie. I was at the newsstand near Concourse C about an hour ago. She was walking with a man. Older, maybe late 50s. They were headed toward the elevators. She looked, I don't know, not upset, just quiet. The agent's expression sharpened. "Did you hear them speak?" "No," the man said. "That's the thing. The guy, he didn't talk to her at all. He just had a hand on her shoulder. I remember because I thought she might be his granddaughter. But then I noticed she didn't look at him. Not once." Security pulled up footage from the newsstand area. The video was there. A girl in a red hoodie, her head lowered, walking with a tall man in a beige coat. His face was turned just enough to obscure the frame. The resolution dipped badly in that second, an unexplained compression artifact blurring the key a few seconds. Technicians scrubbed frame by frame, zooming, enhancing, but the image remained cloudy. Rachel stood behind them, fists clenched so tight her nails broke the skin of her palms. "That's her," she said hoarsely. "That's my daughter. That's Lila." The officer leaned in. "It's possible she left with him." "If he's a family member, she has no uncles," Rachel interrupted. "Her father died 6 years ago. There is no man. Whoever that is, he took her." The implication settled over the room like a thunderclap. A stranger. Abduction. Suddenly, the search shifted. Officers were dispatched to review exterior camera feeds. Customs and Border Protection was notified. Airline staff were re-interviewed. TSA checkpoints were rescanned for anomalies. A list of passengers who had cleared security without companions was cross-referenced with facial recognition. All data was pulled into the command terminal. And still there was nothing. The man's face never appeared clearly. The girl's head was bowed. The camera glitched. Another feed caught them stepping onto an elevator, but the timestamp was corrupted. And the elevator had stopped on 3 floors, none of which provided further footage. It was as if the man knew exactly where the blind spots were. Rachel slumped into a chair, her body taut with exhaustion. Her lips trembled as she whispered to herself, "She was right there. She was in front of all of you, and you lost her." An older female officer approached her, slowly offering a bottle of water. Rachel pushed it away. "She must be so scared," she said. "She doesn't know what he's saying. She can't hear him. If he yells, if he lies, she can't tell. She won't know how to fight back." The officer sat beside her. If she sensed danger, she might have hidden. Kids do that. "She's not like other kids," Rachel whispered. "She won't scream. She won't run. She'll shut down. She'll freeze. You don't understand. She'll disappear inside herself." The command center fell into a heavy silence. A timeline was drafted on the whiteboard. 1:11 p.m. Lila enters the restroom. 1:14 camera feed glitches. 1:46 unknown male and girl matching Lila's description spotted on Concourse C footage. 2:03 elevator scene. Then blank. Officers debated whether the girl in the video was truly Lila. The angle wasn't clear, the build was right, the hoodie matched, but there were no guarantees. Without clearer footage or eyewitness confirmation, it was still a possibility, not proof. Outside, the sun was beginning to fall lower through the vast glass windows of the terminal. Shadows stretched across the polished floors. The passengers moved on their worlds, unbroken, their journeys untouched. But behind the layers of polished security and technical oversight, a child was gone, and no one knew if she was still in the airport, or if the man in the beige coat had led her into someplace darker, farther away, far beyond reach. The search had gone stale. 4 hours in, Rachel had fallen silent, her fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of Lila's small suitcase as if holding onto it could somehow keep her daughter tethered to this place. The command center's buzz had dulled into a tense rhythm of murmured updates, silent nods, and flickering screen light. Officers moved slower now, more methodical, but with less hope. Then Officer Trevor King arrived, cutting through the tension like a cold wind. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the unreadable expression of someone who had seen the worst outcomes and still believed in the smallest odds. At his side was a German shepherd named Juno, her coat sleek, her eyes alert, her posture commanding attention without needing words. King spoke quietly with the lead coordinator. "She's still somewhere in here," he said, not asking. Stating, the coordinator hesitated. "We've been through every sector. Rechecked all restrooms, all terminals. The last footage I've read the report," King interrupted. "Camera glitches don't erase scent. Let's try it." Rachel stood slowly as if her body remembered how to move only because something shifted in the room. "Who is she?" she asked. "That's Juno," King said gently. "She's one of the best at picking up trace human scent, especially low-density sweat signatures. Enclosed space. Cold air. It actually helps." Rachel blinked. "She can find Lila. Even after this long, we're going to try," he said. He knelt, pulling a clear plastic evidence bag from his coat. Inside was one of Lila's shoes left behind at the gate earlier when Rachel had begged security for anything she could give them. "May I?" he asked, and Rachel nodded. Juno sat patiently until King gave a short command in German. Then he opened the bag, held the shoe near her snout, and gave a second command. The change in Juno was immediate. Her posture stiffened, her nostrils flared, her eyes sharpened with a singular focus. She moved forward slowly, nose sweeping low across the tile, her movements tight, deliberate. King followed close, his leash hand firm but relaxed, giving her just enough lead. She moved past the check-in area, past the restrooms already scoured multiple times, past the cluster of agents watching with skeptical eyes. She stopped, sniffed the base of a trash can, circled it once, then kept moving. Rachel and two other officers followed, staying just far enough not to interfere. "She's tracking," King murmured. "The scent's old, maybe 3 hours, but she's picking it up." They followed her past a flight information kiosk, down a less-traveled service corridor that split off from the main concourse. The lights flickered slightly overhead. This area hadn't been renovated in years. Old signs hung crookedly, their print faded. Juno hesitated at an intersection, sniffed toward the left, then suddenly jerked right, pulling taut against the leash. "Hold on," King muttered, surprised. "That's not a public area anymore." "Where's she going?" Rachel asked, her voice cracking. "Maintenance zone. Some old staff bathrooms we shut down after the expansion." Doors are usually locked, but the words fell away as they reached the end of the hall. One door stood slightly ajar, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Dust lined the edges of the tile. A faded placard read, "Restrooms out of service." Juno crouched low, sniffed near the crack beneath the door, then let out a sharp bark. Not frantic, but definite, purposeful. King reached for the door handle. It stuck at first, swollen from disuse, then creaked open. The air inside was different, cooler, still untouched. The walls bore the faint smell of old bleach and mold, but beneath it lingered something else, human presence. "Stay back," he told Rachel quietly, then flicked on his flashlight. Juno moved ahead cautiously, her ears back, her body tense but controlled. One stall door was closed at the far end. King approached, slowly motioned to another officer to cover him, then knocked twice. No response. Lila Rachel whispered from behind, "Are you in there?" Silence. Juno sat suddenly, ears forward. Her body leaned slightly toward the door. "She's here," King said. Or she was. He stepped forward, nudged the door gently. It creaked inward. The stall was empty, but the corner had scuff marks, a faint outline where someone had sat curled up against the wall. A few pencil markings traced faint shapes on the stall panel. A crescent moon, a pair of animal eyes. Scribbled words, barely visible. "Quiet is safe." She was here. King repeated, kneeling. "Not long ago, sense strong." Juno sniffed the space twice, then turned her head sharply toward the far wall. She stood moved to the side panel where a loose piece of metal was bolted over old plumbing. She barked again, more insistent now. King stood tapping the panel. It echoed hollowly. "That's not standard. That's a crawl space." Rachel moved closer, ignoring the warnings. "You think she went through there?" King's jaw tightened. If she felt scared, cornered, she might have. "We've had kids do stranger things when they're hiding." An officer returned with bolt cutters. Within seconds, the cover clattered to the ground, revealing a narrow opening behind it, just wide enough for a small child to squeeze through. Juno crouched low and sniffed inside, her tail stiff, her ears alert. The space beyond was dark and winding, lit only by the spill of King's flashlight. A trail of smudged fingerprints traced the dusty pipe inside. A small shoe print dented the grime. Rachel's breath caught as she saw the faintest imprint of Lila's name scrawled with the edge of a pencil on the inner wall. "I'm here," it read. "I'm okay, I think." The crawl space narrowed after the first 6 feet coated in a thin layer of dust and grime, the kind that had settled undisturbed for years. Officer King shined his flashlight down the shaft, searching for any movement, any flicker of color or shadow, but the silence remained heavy. Juno pressed her snout to the cold floor, sniffing with greater urgency, and then, without warning, she turned sharply padded back into the main restroom space and began barking at one of the old metal stalls, her front paws scratching with focused intensity at the rusted base. King followed, confused but alert. The stall door was already open. They had checked it minutes earlier and found nothing, but Juno persisted, her nails scraping loud against metal, her whole body vibrating with tension. "What is it, girl?" he muttered, crouching down beside her. Rachel stepped closer, her hand covering her mouth. "She's never wrong," King added, now inspecting the back of the stall. It looked like every other one, peeling paint a loose hinge, graffiti scratched faintly into the surface. He scanned lower, and then under the back corner, partially wedged behind a warped pipe, something caught the light. He reached in, fingers grazing cardboard. "Hold on," he said quickly, pulling it free. It was a notebook, slim black leather bound with the spine half-worn and a corner slightly torn. Rachel gasped. "That's hers," she whispered. "That's Lila's. That's her second ear." The air changed. Every officer in the room stilled. King held the book, gently opening it to the middle. The pages were dense with soft graphite lettering, the lines tilted in a way that spoke of quick writing, urgency, perhaps fear. He flipped closer to the end and found a half-finished page. The letters were smaller, they're uneven. "The man doesn't talk," it read. "He smells like medicine. Not like hospitals. Like sleeping medicine." I didn't know what to say. He touched my shoulder. I was afraid. I didn't scream. I ran when he looked away. I came in here. I found the quiet. I don't know what time it is. I think Mom will be mad. I hope not. I just wanted to be invisible. Just a little while. Rachel sank to the floor, her back against the wall, tears spilling from her eyes. She was scared. She whispered. She ran. She hid. King's expression hardened. The man, he didn't follow. Or he didn't realize she'd slipped away. One of the younger officers leaned in. "We thought she was taken," he said. "But what if she wasn't? What if she escaped?" The idea shifted everything. They had been working under the assumption of abduction. But this meant she had agency. She had vanished herself, hidden in fear, not stolen. That meant she might still be nearby, still hiding, still waiting. Juno began sniffing around the sink basin where the notebook had likely fallen. She circled once, nose pointed toward the wall vent. King joined her, tapping the grate. "If she crawled through here, we need schematics. We need to know what's behind these panels, what leads where." The lead technician was already on his tablet, pulling up old infrastructure diagrams. "There's a sub-maintenance level that connects behind the old janitorial wing," he said. That zone was never sealed off properly after renovation. It's mostly storage, low traffic, no cameras. "How do we access it?" King asked. "There's an emergency ladder 2 hallways down, behind a locked panel. I'll show you." Rachel stood shakily, clutching the notebook to her chest. "She left this," she said. "She wanted someone to find it. She's not running. She's waiting for me." King nodded. "Then we don't waste time. Let's go." Juno moved with renewed energy now, as if the presence of the journal had confirmed her instincts. She led them through the corridor, with purpose paws clicking on tile tail, stiff nose low. As they passed the last functioning security camera, Rachel glanced up at the lens and whispered to herself, "Come on, baby. Hold on just a little longer." The hallway narrowed. The ceiling dipped. Ahead, the technician unlocked a rusted panel and pulled it open, revealing a steep ladder into darkness. The air that rose from the opening was cooler, tinged with dust and something faintly metallic. Juno didn't hesitate. She waited for the command, then began descending, first her body calm and precise. King followed next. Rachel gripped the notebook harder, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the first rung. Below them, silence waited. The kind that didn't just fill your ears, but settled into your bones, into your breath, into the space where fear lives when you love someone so much you can barely breathe without them. The ladder groaned under each footstep, metal cold against palms slick with sweat. The sub-maintenance level was exactly as the blueprints had suggested. Narrow, dimly lit, barely ventilated, a skeletal corridor of forgotten piping and sealed vents. Rachel climbed down slowly behind Officer King, notebook pressed to her chest like a fragile pulse. Juno waited at the bottom, already pacing in tight semicircles, ears, high body still charged with momentum. The flashlight beam jittered as King scanned the hallway. Rachel whispered, "She's still here, isn't she?" And the words barely escaped her lips. "She could be," King replied. "Everything suggests she never left the airport. That journal entry..." She ran because she was afraid. She saw something in that man, maybe danger, maybe confusion, and she responded the way a child like her would. She disappeared herself, and now Rachel asked. "Now," King said, pausing at an air vent and testing its seal, "we find out where fear led her next." An officer above called down with an update. Elevator logs show no travel from lower maintenance access in the last 4 hours. No pressure sensors tripped either. She didn't go down any further. She's still here, somewhere on this level or above it. Rachel felt the air shift. For the first time since Lila vanished, the tide had turned. She hadn't been taken. She had survived. She had hidden herself, which meant there was still time. But not much. The temperature on the sublevel was dropping, and Rachel noticed it now, her fingertips colder, the metal damp with condensation. The HVAC system had likely failed down here long ago, and if Lila had stayed still too long, the thought made Rachel's voice catch in her throat. King radioed up. "We're authorizing limited off-leash deployment. Confirm perimeter is secured and all exits remain manned." A beat of static, then confirmed. "No movement on primary nor secondary checkpoints. You're clear to proceed." He knelt beside Juno, who sat still but trembling with readiness. "Find her girl," he said quietly. "Su-Chen." The German command was a switch flipped. Juno surged forward, nose sweeping in arcs, tail flat, and straight weaving through tight corridors as the team followed behind. They passed old electrical panels, unused cleaning closets, even a rusted vending machine left humming in the dark. Every few feet, Juno would pause, test the air, and move on until finally she stopped cold. Her ears swiveled. She sniffed the floor and let out a sharp bark just once. "What is it?" Rachel asked, stepping forward. Juno didn't bark again. She lowered her body and began sniffing a metal grate where a floor drain opened into a narrow trench that ran alongside the wall. King examined it quickly. It's part of the old water filtration route. Might still be connected to storm access. Would she fit through there? Rachel asked. King hesitated, then nodded. If she was desperate enough, if she felt hunted. But she's not hunted, Rachel said, her voice breaking. She's just hiding. From everything. Which is what makes this harder, King muttered. She won't respond to calls. She won't answer even if she hears something, which she probably won't. Every second she stays in survival mode, she's slipping deeper out of reach. They pulled schematics again. The trench line passed beneath Terminal B's far concourse and ended near a locked panel beside the staff baggage tunnel. If Lila had followed it on hands and knees, maybe crawling, maybe clutching that notebook, she could now be somewhere within a 100-yard stretch, completely devoid of surveillance and rarely visited. She's in the wall. King whispered, not metaphorically. She's in the bones of this building. The officers discussed thermal drones, but the old infrastructure was dense with metal and reflected heat poorly. Dogs were faster, more precise. Juno had one advantage. Humans did not her ability to track residual scent even through ventilation drafts and industrial chill. But for her to work freely, they needed to release her from the leash within reason. King turned to Rachel. We'll shadow her. She'll stay within command distance. But she's faster without restraint, and we're running out of quiet time." Rachel nodded slowly. "Do it." Juno received the signal. A clipped word, a nod, and she took off not in a sprint, but with purpose, her nose almost brushing the wall as she zigzagged forward. Rachel and 2 officers followed close, keeping light, low footsteps, careful not to startle anything that might already be curled in a corner ahead. They passed metal crates, a collapsed scaffolding plank, and at one turn a discarded child snack wrapper from some distant shift in airport logistics. Every small detail felt loaded with meaning. Every second pulsed like a warning. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the journal's final words. "I think Mom will be mad." "I hope not. I just wanted to be invisible, just a little while." It echoed inside her like a confession she hadn't earned. This wasn't fear of being hurt. This was fear of disappointing. Fear of misinterpreting the world. Lila wasn't running from someone. She was running from misunderstanding. From herself. From the feeling that something was wrong and no one else could feel it. Suddenly, Juno barked short, sharp, and not alarmed. She stood at the base of a maintenance panel, sniffing towards the seam where 2 rusted metal doors met unevenly. One paw lifted. She pressed it forward, then sat back. Ears perked. King approached, hand steady, flashlight angled upward. "Something's in there," he said. "Could be heat, could be movement. Or both." He stepped forward and unlatched the lock. The hinge shrieked softly, protesting. The space inside was tight, a backup access conduit packed with cable clusters and maintenance boards. But just beneath the lowest bundle, a thread of fabric peeked out. Red, hooded, stained with dust, and motionless. Juno froze. Her posture shifted from alert to deliberate. In a single breath, her body angled toward the far corner of the cramped utility corridor where the edge of that red hoodie trailed beneath a tangle of old insulation. King motioned for silence, raising his palm as he crouched and extended his flashlight toward the space. But before he could shine it inside, Juno let out a low, rumbling whine, softer than a bark, heavier than a breath. It was the sound trained handlers recognized instantly, not alarm, not aggression, but communication. It was her way of saying someone is here, alive. She sniffed again, then backed away slowly, her body low to the ground, tail flat against the floor. King inched closer, reaching carefully to lift the insulation. But beneath it, instead of a body, he found a narrow seam in the paneling, 2 aluminum plates not welded flush, forming a hairline gap. He pressed against it. The panel flexed inward. "It's not a wall," he said. "It's a divider. Temporary." Rachel stepped beside him, heart pounding, her hand trembling as she touched the edge. "What is this space?" she asked. It wasn't on the blueprint. "It's undocumented," said the technician behind them. "Must have been part of the old redesign, the construction that never got finished during the expansion. They sealed off some auxiliary rooms with prefab panels. No electrical, no plumbing. Not supposed to be accessible." King examined the edge with narrowed eyes. "Tell that to the girl who just crawled in here." They pulled out a crowbar, wedged it into the seam, and pried. The aluminum groaned, popped free, and folded inward to reveal a shallow cavity less than 3 feet deep and 5 feet across, tucked behind what had once been an industrial restroom wall. The air that spilled out was warm and stale, and inside, curled like a seed in the dark, was Lila. She didn't move at first. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, head down, face hidden inside the fold of her red hoodie. The hearing aid was gone. Her fingers were dusty, trembling. The notebook rested beside her like a fallen wing. Rachel dropped to her knees, reaching in without a second thought. "Lila," she breathed, her voice already cracking. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm here." The girl flinched, eyes barely opening. She didn't recoil, she didn't speak. She simply stared, blank, wide-eyed, disoriented. Rachel didn't wait. She reached in, cupping Lila's face, gently smoothing her dusty hair away. "You're okay," she said. "I found you. We found you." Juno pressed forward next, crawling partway into the space and lowering her head beside the girl's knees. Her soft breath touched Lila's cheek, and for the first time in hours something flickered in the girl's expression, recognition. She blinked slowly, then reached out one trembling hand and touched the dog's ear. Dog knows me. She whispered hoarsely, the words broken and slow-shaped more by muscle memory than breath. I stayed here. Quiet. Rachel nodded, crying now, one hand never leaving her daughter's shoulder. You did good. You stayed safe. I'm not mad, baby. I was just so scared. But you're okay now. You're okay. King reached into the compartment, gently helping support Lila's weight as Rachel lifted her. She was light, too light, cold to the touch. Her cheeks were pale, lips dry, but her eyes were beginning to refocus. She's dehydrated, King said, and exhausted. But conscious. That's a win. Rachel hugged Lila to her chest, not caring about the dirt or the smell or the aches in her back. Nothing else mattered. Juno sat beside them, head tilted upward, tail thumping gently once, then again. An officer radioed in. We have visual, target located, alive and responsive. Request med support, Concourse subsection C Sector 5. Rachel didn't let go. She thought she was doing the right thing, she whispered. She didn't know we were looking. She couldn't hear us. She stayed still, King said, glancing toward the small hollow they had just opened. It's the only reason we found her. Juno sensed her through steel and concrete. That's not instinct, that's bond. Lila finally looked up at her mother, blinking slowly. Her lips moved. Was it long? Rachel smiled through tears. Too long, but you're safe now. And then, as they prepared to move her, Lila turned back toward the hollow eyes, searching. My book, she said. Rachel reached in and retrieved the notebook, brushing off a streak of grime. She placed it gently in Lila's hands. Never left it, Lila mumbled, clutching it close. It's how I hear me. King looked to the technician. Let's mark this wall. We'll need to seal it, but after we scan the rest of the sublevel, there may be more spots like this. But even as he said it, Juno's ears perked again. She stepped forward, sniffed the far wall of the corridor they'd just come through. Her posture shifted, once more alert, then confused. She whined low and turned back the way they'd come, her body stiff with tension, nose suddenly pulling her toward the upper corridor they had already passed. The first thing Lila truly saw after the blur of light and shadow was Juno's face, calm, steady, familiar. The fluorescent flicker of flashlights had filled the narrow hideout, but none of that anchored her like Juno's golden eyes, soft and low, staring up with complete stillness. Lila blinked, her vision clouded by cold and fatigue, and for a moment she couldn't tell if this was another dream, another fragment of silence folded in her mind like so many others from the last few hours. But then Juno moved a subtle nudge of her nose against the girl's knee, and that was real. That wasn't her mind playing tricks. That was warmth, recognition. She reached out, her fingers weak and dusty, and touched Juno's fur just lightly, just enough to feel the breath beneath the coat. And in that moment, the cave, she had folded herself into that cold, hushed prison of drywall, and silence cracked open. She hadn't heard the officer's call, hadn't heard the creak of the metal being pried open. She hadn't heard her mother's voice choking her name through tears. But she had seen the glimmer of Juno's collar in the flashlight, had seen the shadows fall back from the dog's shape, and something in her chest had finally gently let go. Rachel's arms wrapped around her before the air could even change temperature. A sob, a crush of warmth. And still, Lila did not speak. She simply held tight to the notebook at her side, the pages damp now from condensation and the heat of her own skin, clinging to it as though it still translated her thoughts more clearly than her lips ever could. Rachel whispered over and over, not knowing which words would reach, if any. But Juno understood. She always had. They wrapped Lila in 2 emergency blankets, lifted her gently out of the compartment. She didn't resist, didn't flinch, only blinked at the sudden change of brightness. Her knees gave way once, but King caught her. An EMT was already kneeling with a flashlight and thermal wrap, checking her pulse, her temperature, her eyes. She's dehydrated, probably mild hypothermia. We need to move fast, the medic said, but even as he spoke, Lila turned her face away from the light eyes, searching. She reached for Juno again. The dog had stayed just inches from her side, never barked, never stepped away. Rachel crouched beside her daughter, holding the open notebook. Do you want to write? she asked gently. Lila gave a tiny nod. Rachel passed her the pencil tucked into the binding, and Lila gripped it, hands shaking. She didn't write straight lines. Her words wobbled. But they came. "Dog found me," she scribbled, then paused, blinking. She knew. She knows me. Then she hesitated, breath fogging slightly on the cold air, and wrote, "I'm safe now, right?" Rachel read it once. Twice. And her hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling again, not in panic, not in fear, but in release. King looked away briefly, his jaw tight. The medic swallowed hard. One of the other officers rubbed his sleeve across his eyes and muttered, "That's a yes, kid. That's a hell yes." Juno sat down beside Lila, her head resting lightly on the girl's shin, and for the first time since the day had shattered into chaos, there was stillness. Not the kind that suffocates, the kind that says quietly, "You made it." Lila flipped the notebook closed and tucked it under her arm, eyes never leaving Juno. She leaned forward gently and buried her face in the dog's neck. No sound came from her lips, but her shoulders trembled. Her body softened, and her fingers curled into the dog's fur like roots finding home. The EMT waited, giving her space. No one rushed her, no one spoke. Juno didn't move, didn't shift her weight. She stayed, breathing slowly solid and real, her job finished, but her watch not yet over. Then, finally, Lila looked up and saw her mother's face, fully exhausted, red-eyed, but so deeply undeniably there. Lila smiled, a tiny thing, a half-smile, really, but it was enough. Rachel smiled back and mouthed the words again, "Just in case I'm here. I love you. You're safe." Lila reached out, touched her mother's lips gently, then signed the same thing back. Safe. Home. Mom. And Juno thumped her tail once, as if to say, "Told you I'd find her." They began the slow walk back through the corridor. Officers cleared the path. Lights dimmed. The sound of radios crackled above them, distant now, like static at the edge of an old dream. But none of it mattered to Lila. She had found the one sound that always made sense, even in silence. The heartbeat of a dog who never stopped searching. Back in the airport's medical unit, the hum of equipment was soft and rhythmic, steady, like the breathing of someone finally asleep after hours of bracing against fear. Lila sat wrapped in 2 thermal blankets, her fingers loosely holding a paper cup of warm water, the rim trembling every time she raised it. Rachel sat beside her, not touching unless invited, but always near her eyes, never straying. Officers filtered in and out of the room quietly while medical staff checked vitals and whispered updates into earpieces. The energy had shifted. Urgency had given way to aftermath, to explanation, to repair. When Lila was warm enough, calm enough, she opened her notebook and began writing. Slowly, at first, then with more confidence. She flipped to a fresh page and in the kind of neat, careful lettering her teachers often praised, wrote, "The man didn't talk. Not once. He came in to clean. I saw him through the stall crack. He had gloves and a cart, but he smelled very bad. Like hospital beds, but old. Like sleep pills. Like trash water and medicine." Rachel read silently, then glanced up. "He was a janitor," she asked. Lila nodded, wrote more. "He dropped something, a bottle. He didn't see me. I don't think he knew anyone was there." She paused. Then, "He walked funny, like dizzy." An officer stepped closer, flipping through his tablet. "That matches one of our contracted night shift cleaners," he said. "He was in that wing earlier than scheduled. Claimed he wasn't feeling well. Security escorted him out 2 hours ago when he collapsed near the staff exit. He was drug tested. Over-the-counter sedatives in his system. No sign of criminal intent." Rachel turned to Lila gently. "You ran because of the smell." Lila nodded, then scribbled, "I thought I would sleep forever if he touched me." Her hands trembled as she handed the notebook back, and the room went quiet again. Not out of fear this time, but realization. Misinterpretation had spiraled into crisis. The lead technician approached with a grim expression. The camera glitch didn't help, he admitted. The hallway feed went pixelated the moment she entered. "We assumed technical interference, but it turns out a wire junction overheated and caused a brief data dropout." By the time the footage resumed, she was gone, and the cleaner was visible in the hallway, but only his back. Then a blur. It looked deliberate, but it wasn't. Another officer added, "The analytics flagged the man and girl together in proximity with no facial match, so the system auto-raised a potential abduction alert. Standard procedure. But context failed us. Again." Rachel processed it slowly. "So what you're saying is, no one took her no," the officer said. She hid, because she felt something was wrong. And the system filled in the blanks. Wrongly. Lila wrote again, "I didn't know how to say I was scared. I just wanted to be safe. Quiet was the only safe thing." Rachel leaned in and whispered, "You did the right thing." King entered the room quietly, then kneeling beside Juno, who had stayed at the door like a quiet guardian. She trusted her instincts, he said. Most adults wouldn't even know how to listen that deeply. One of the TSA supervisors lingered near the doorway, conflicted. Protocol demands action. And fast assumptions usually work in our favor, but maybe this is a reminder we needed that not every threat looks like one, and not every silence is absence. Lila looked between the adults, unsure. Then carefully wrote, "I didn't mean to make people scared." Rachel shook her head firmly. "You didn't. You helped us learn. You showed us how deep quiet can go." The technician tapped something into his tablet. "We're filing this entire case as a systemic review, updating emergency procedures, adding real-time context alerts, and maybe making sure someone human checks the footage before we assume the worst." Lila reached for the notebook again and underlined the earlier line. "Dog knew me." Then added, "Dog didn't get confused." King chuckled softly. "She never does." For the next few minutes, the room simply sat in that shared understanding that a failure of systems had collided with the instincts of a child, and only by giving space to both had the truth finally been uncovered. Lila leaned against her mother's side, not asleep, but no longer rigid. Her pulse slowing, her fingers curled around the corner of the notebook like it was her second skin. Juno rested her head on Rachel's shoe, one ear still perked, listening not for orders, but for breath, for stillness. For the subtle shift that might mean it was time to move again. But for now, silence held. And this time it meant safety. The days that followed moved slowly, gently, like waves after a storm. Lila stayed in the hospital ward connected to the airport's emergency unit for observation, but she was stable. Her vitals returned to normal. Her body, once curled inwards from cold and fear, began to soften, to stretch, to reclaim space. She asked for a new notebook, her old one, now a memorial of both her silence and survival. She filled it in pieces, drawings of Juno's ears, quiet memories, and a list of smells she never wanted to smell again. Rachel never left her side. She slept in a chair. She memorized every new expression Lila made, relearning the face of her child, not as it had been before, but as it had become stronger, wiser, quieter, in ways that had nothing to do with hearing. On the third morning, Juno came to visit. King entered with her, leading the way like an honored guest. Lila's eyes lit up in a way that broke something soft in every adult present. She didn't jump up or scream. Of course she didn't, but her entire body leaned forward with instinctive joy. Juno walked straight to the bed, sat down and laid her head in Lila's lap like it had always belonged there. Lila smiled and signed slowly, "You found me." Then she picked up her pencil and wrote, "You're the first one I understood with just my heart." Rachel watched her daughter stroke the fur behind Juno's ears and felt something settle, not relief, something deeper, a quiet restoration of faith. King pulled something from his coat pocket. "This is from the team," he said. "You don't have to keep it, but we thought you might want to." It was a collar, real leather navy blue, small and hand-stitched, not for a dog, for a wrist. It was a bracelet, and at the center a tiny polished silver badge shaped like Juno's K9 emblem. Underneath it, engraved in soft script, were the words, "She listened with her heart." Lila took it gently, turned it over twice, and then fastened it around her wrist. She didn't look at anyone. She just placed her hand over her heart and smiled. Juno wagged her tail. News of the case, once chaotic and misreported, was now corrected and reframed. It no longer led with "missing girl at airport" or "possible abduction." The new headlines were quiet but powerful. K9 finds deaf girl through bond, not command. Juno's heartbeat, how a dog heard what no one else could. The airport released an official statement apologizing for the initial failures in surveillance and response. But more importantly, they committed to training reforms. For the first time, their K-9 division included emotional resonance training with deaf and neurodivergent children. And at the top of the training video archive was a recorded debrief of the case, not with trauma, but with insight showing footage of Juno's responses, Lila's notebook pages, and the timeline, as it truly happened, not as fear imagined it. Lila was invited gently, never pressured to speak at the debrief through her writing. She submitted 3 sentences. The last read, "Sometimes silence is not fear. It's just the only language we have left." It became the tagline of the updated training manual. King framed it. Before they left the hospital, the airport's chief of security visited personally, bringing Lila a printed patch identical to Juno's vest emblem. "You're part of her unit now," he said. "Honorary." Lila didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She tapped her badge once, then signed friend. As they returned home weeks later, the rhythm of life returned not quite the same, but not broken. Rachel enrolled Lila in a storytelling through drawing program where she found new ways to share her experiences. One of her first pieces was titled "The Wall That Breathed," a sketch of a narrow crawl space lit by a dog's steady eyes. Juno returned to duty but visited the family often. Every time Lila saw her, she wore the bracelet. Not because she had to, because it reminded her that even when no one could hear her voice, someone could feel her presence. That not every sound is noise, not every silence is absence. The final entry in that new notebook read, "When everything was too loud, she found me. Not because I called, not because I cried, but because she remembered what I smelled like when I was brave." That line, too, made it into the training archive. And for every K-9 that followed, for every officer who learned to see not just the rules, but the children behind the panic, it was a lesson written not in commands, but in connection. Not every story ends with celebration. Some just end with breathing, with safety, with a girl in a red hoodie and a dog who never gave up. And sometimes that's the kind of ending that teaches the rest of us how to begin again. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing for more heartfelt tales like this one. I'm curious what part of Lila and Juno's journey touched you the most. And where are you watching from? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.